Hello, everyone, and welcome to McGill Cares webcast series supporting family and informal care partners. I'm Claire Webster, a former caregiver, certified dementia care consultant, and founder of McGill University's Dementia Education Program. I work with a dynamic team of leading healthcare professionals to oversee the program, who include Dr. José Moret from the Division of Geriatric Medicine and Dr. Serge Gauthier, Professor Emeritus, formerly of the McGill University Research Center for Studies in Aging. McGill Cares is supported by the Amelia Saputo Community Outreach for Dementia Care. The McGill Dementia Education Program offers a comprehensive range of free resources to educate and support persons living with dementia, family and informal care partners, healthcare professionals, medical students, and the public at large. One of our most important resources is our Dementia Companion Guide, which can be downloaded for free, or printed copies are available on Amazon. It's now currently available in over 10 languages and with many more to come. So I encourage all of you watching to get a copy, either printed or download it for free. So today's topic is called Coping with Ambiguous Loss in Caregiving. This is going to be the third appearance of my guest today, because this is a topic that keeps coming up over and over again. So my guest is Corrie Sirota. Corrie Sirota is a clinical social worker and sessional lecturer at the McGill School of Social Work, who specializes in loss and bereavement. Corrie is also a TEDx speaker, the clinical director at Myra's Kids Foundation, a nonprofit organization that supports bereaved children and their families. And she is also the author of Someone Died, Now What? A personal and professional perspective on coping with loss and grief. So Ms. Sirota will speak about the types of loss triggered by a diagnosis of dementia, the varied emotions that accompany it, and ways to cope with anticipatory grief, or the other term is ambiguous loss. Welcome to McGill Cares, Corrie.
Thanks so much, Claire, for having me. It's great to be back, and I love the work that you and your colleagues do.
Well, thank you so much. And I work with families on a regular basis, as you do as well. And the topic of loss keeps coming up over and over again, and it's also a request that we have from viewers. So let's begin by perhaps, can you describe the concept of anticipatory loss and how it impacts people?
Absolutely. So the simplest definition of anticipatory grief is it's a process that's associated with grieving someone before they've actually died. And you mentioned ambiguous loss. I wouldn't use the term simultaneously. Just to clarify, anticipatory grief is the grief one feels when someone hasn't died, but yet they are slowly changing who they are, and by no fault of their own, an illness, of course. Whereas ambiguous loss can be related to a loss of a person or of a situation. Let's say someone goes missing. And so they haven't been found. So you're grieving them, and they've literally been they're literally nowhere to be found. So someone who goes hiking and disappears, if we've heard, or was kidnapped. So that's a kind of ambiguous loss, because we don't know really what happened to that person. But you're right, the terms are very much interchangeable, and one could use the term ambiguous loss to the loss of the person that someone once was, which is, of course, the case with dementia or Parkinson's, etc.
And so, I guess this term, it doesn't only apply to care partners of a person living with dementia. I guess it can also apply to other illnesses as well, correct? Like ALS absolutely. Or Parkinson's.
100%. And I think we need to be using these terms and helping what we're doing today, normalizing this feeling, because it is a very unsettling, to say the least, experience for someone, because it does apply to any person, what I would call any unwelcome change or transition that happens in their life. Unlike grief, though, where the family members, after someone dies, they experience bereavement. When it comes to anticipatory grief, the person themselves experiences these feelings as well.
So if we now go back to, let's say, dementia, there are different types of loss that, especially I would say spouses feel. I mean, yes, children witnessing the changes, the cognitive changes or physical changes, as I did with my mother experience. But I find that with spouses in particular, there's all kinds of loss that they're experiencing throughout the course of the illness. For example, the loss of communication, the loss of intimacy, the loss of witnessing a person, who's maybe no longer able to maintain the grooming the way they used to. So how could people deal with these different types of losses?
So it's a great question. Each and every loss has to be acknowledged and dealt with, coped with differently. So let's talk about them as secondary losses that we don't typically think about, but yet we're experiencing every day. So if we look at something like the loss of intimacy, that's something, two taboo topics in one: death and sex. Oh my goodness,
Mm-hmm.
it's something that we're not accustomed to and don't typically, it doesn't really roll off the tongue, but it's something that we need to be acknowledging and talking about and being, I'm going to say, creative about finding ways in which you can be still intimate. It doesn't have to only be about sexual relations. It could be about hand holding and kissing and hugging. So it's reframing what intimacy is. And I like to break down the word to intimacy, intimacy. So finding those ways of creating moments to be intimate, but recognizing that it won't be the same. So that would be something like the intimacy, the communication. I think we have to recognize who the person is now. And so engaging in different kinds of conversations with them, possibly speaking slower and more clearly, maintaining eye contact so that they can see you when they're speaking, giving the person the grace of plenty of time to respond, being patient. I know that's a big word to use, and it is difficult when you're watching someone you love change so dramatically, and that's why I called it unwelcome change. But recognizing the changes and adapting the way in which you communicate with them would be in a good strategy. I think you mentioned the loss of their appearance. It's true that people will start to not care about what they look like, and that's hard to watch somebody who was very well manicured and took care of themselves so properly, groomed themselves so carefully. Mm-hmm. We may need to help them a bit with that, because it's changed for them. It's no longer important. So I understand that their appearance lost meaning to them. So it's not that they are doing something on purpose or wanting trying to upset anyone else. They really just, it's not something that became a priority for them, and that's another loss for you, to watch somebody who is a caretaker watch somebody not care anymore. It's not about not caring. It's about recognizing that it lost meaning for them. So we might have to help them a bit in that area.
Another area that I hear a lot is the loss of the ability to socialize, which really impacts the couple. That the person who is experiencing the cognitive changes no longer wants to go to a party, which is understandable because it's just too much stimulation for them, right? But there's a big loss in socialization, which often leads to both people becoming isolated. And I really encourage the families that I work with to try to let their closest friends at least know what's going on, because there's such a big stigma around this illness, and stigma leads to isolation because they become embarrassed, ashamed to go out, right? And so I think that maybe by breaking this stigma and by sharing with their closest friends that something's going on, it could help avoid them becoming so isolated.
I couldn't agree with you more. I actually hear a bit of the opposite, but it's around the socializing that other family members or good friends get uncomfortable and don't know how to. So maybe it's part of helping them understand they're still them. They just may not communicate as well or as clearly. And it is really hurtful to the family going through this experience that they're what they call, and we both use the words, good friends. They're how good friends are they if they've completely cut off the person and the family member with that condition or illness. So we really need to, I agree, we need to be, as a caregiver, reaching out, explaining, educating. And I want to go, I'm going to be the optimist here and say the good friends are going to remain good friends, but they need the information so that they can be the best friends that they can be. I say grief changes your address book.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And because, dementia isn't only about memory issues, it results in also a significant change in behavior. And if you don't explain to your friends, sometimes people could think, oh, well, maybe that person has a drinking problem, or maybe that person is like, oh, they're bored with us because they're not participating in the conversation. So I think it's really important that you do explain the changes that are occurring, and then, it doesn't make the situation easier, but at least, you're opening yourself up as a couple to get that support and, break that isolation.
Absolutely. Because it's the isolation that really can do a tremendous number on anybody. And we saw that from COVID.
A point that you brought up also earlier is, I think it's important to embrace what they still can do. Because when we talk about loss, like I hear a lot from, the families that I work with, everything the person can no longer do. And they keep saying, oh, well, they used to be able to do this and they used to be able to do that, and now they can't do it. And I think that instead of maybe focusing on everything they can't do, which you said, why don't we start focusing on everything they still can do? And it's not up to them to change, it's up to us to change. Right?
Absolutely. Yes. Oh my gosh. I love it. The whole approach that you have is so important. I work from a strength-based approach and practice to help identify you can't and you won't, and we don't need to ignore what isn't, but really so much if we can balance it with what the person can still do, who the person still is, their wonderful qualities. I'm going to maybe say something a bit controversial here, because I always couch it with this. Sometimes getting a diagnosis, while as devastating as it could be, I also like to say you can look at it a bit as a gift, because it gives you that time now that someone, because in the field I'm in with the sudden death, where you don't have any warning, here you have information, someone is slowly changing. So now let's use the time wisely. Let's have the conversations we need to have. Let's put the things in order we need to have. Let's do the things we still can do while we can do them, and focus on that rather than on everything that's only on everything that is lost.
And when I work with couples, that's what I often say to the healthy spouses, do everything that you can now, with your husband, your wife. And sometimes I hear, well, we never used to take walks together. We never did this together. We never did that together. And I say, well, now is the time, and unfortunately, because dementia is an ever evolving illness, the clock is ticking. And so, you really want to try to do as much as you can. And same goes, I think, with the children. If you have had a bit of a tumultuous relationship with your mother or your father in the past, now's the time to get to the point of maybe forgiveness and take that time, because there'll be a point where it's too late to make those amends. So, try to embrace and forgive and do what you can to spend that quality time together.
What a perfect approach to helping navigate the whole process. It's messy. We both know this. It's messy. It's difficult. It's hard to watch the person that you knew as one way change. And that is, in fact, how we can even look at it as your relationship does change. But this essence of the person, and for better or for worse, we marry, we connect, we love, hopefully unconditionally, and that means the good, the bad, and the ugly.
So the one challenge also with dementia is because we don't know, like it's a disease that could last quite a few years. We don't, and everybody always asks how long. Well, we don't know, right? But we know that it it's anywhere from 7 to 12 years, depending if the person has any other also coexisting health conditions. But again, because it's a progressive and ever evolving illness, the concept of losing is constant, right? So you get over one loss, so the fact that you can't have those conversations the way you'd have anymore, and then you're witnessing the physical changes that occur. How could care partners adapt to like that constant evolution of loss?
Oh gosh, it's recognizing that it's a moving target, and knowing that every day is going to be potentially different, and it's learning how to live with uncertainty, which I'm going to go back to. I know we don't like to talk about it, but COVID, if it taught us anything, it's that we cannot predict the future, and that we had to learn how to live with uncertainty. But the irony here is everyone likes control. And we like to feel like we're in control. Okay, I get that. But the truth is, even before COVID, even before this disease, we were never in control. We just thought we were. Mm-hmm. So we've already survived 100% of our worst days. So no matter, it's having that belief that you can and you will be able to navigate this, and you will be able to get through this by communicating, reaching out for resources. And I didn't even say that a lot, and I figured I would say it so much because it would come up perhaps with other questions, is getting support is a sign of not weakness, but strength. Oh my gosh, God bless you, Claire, for doing the work you do and helping people normalize this experience. So whether it's working with you or any kind of the dementia handbook that you have, resource guide that's fantastic, and groups, and even online, be careful where you go, but getting that kind of support to know that this is a long haul. This is not not a sprint, it's a marathon. Mm-hmm. So putting in any kind of mechanisms that can help you with this long-term experience by reaching out for support from those who offer it and people who get it. That's why I'm a big fan of support groups. Mm-hmm. That will help you navigate the changes and explain, because information is power. Explain what that process can look like and does look like. So it helps, again, I'll say, normalize it and give you the support you need as you continue to experience all these changes.
No, I mean, as you mentioned, I think what's important, and I tell families this all the time, is you really want to be one step ahead of the illness at all times, right? So if the person is in the early stages, be prepared of what's coming in the middle stages. And then when you're middle, be prepared about the late. And, oftentimes people say, well, I'd rather not know, I'm not there yet.
Yes, sure. That's right, what I would hear.
Right. But I think that in order to avoid a crisis situation, or in order to avoid constantly, is this normal? Is this normal? Is it normal? Mm-hmm. Educate yourself, right? Understand what's coming next. And even, and most important, like you mentioned, is going out there and reaching out for those support services that could help, and maybe support groups aren't for everybody, but then get, one-on-one support, right? But you can't just go into this saying, well, I'm going to wait until something goes wrong before reaching out, right?
We'll see what happens is probably
we'll see what happens.
Yes, one of the most frustrating statements I ever hear, because or people say, what choice do I have? I will say, you always have a choice. You may not like your choices. They may not be the choices that you would have wanted. So let's pick the best of the worst choices, but let's do exactly what you're suggesting. In fact, the information, so we can't change the illness, but we can prepare ourselves for what is coming, and how to put things in places, which is why I use the word a bit of a gift, because it's something you wouldn't have if something sudden happens. And you have the time now to educate and organize your life and your affairs so that you can go into this as strong as possible.
And I think, as you mentioned COVID earlier, what COVID has taught us is that in life you have a plan A, but you need a plan B, right? So people will often say, oh no, or I'm never going to transition my loved one to a residence, or I'm never doing this, never doing that. But it's like, okay, but what happens if you as a primary care partner, something happens to you? Right. What then, right? So I think that we all need a plan B, right? It's having plan A is just not good enough anymore. You've got to have a plan B.
I say B, C, and D at this point.
Yeah. So let's talk about the big word guilt, right? Guilt plays such a big role among family members. I hear so often that as a result of the person's, and it doesn't only apply to dementia. I've had friends who had, a loved one with cancer and they were no longer able to go out the way they did. And so, the spouse or the mother or the son or daughter say, well, I can't travel. I can't do this. I can't do this. I can't, because I can't leave them. Right. So how, like, what type of advice do you give to people in terms of allowing themselves or giving themselves permission to continue on a bit with their own life and having some respite for themselves?
You're right. It's a big word. It's a word that is very, very commonly experienced and expressed in all types of situations similar to what we're talking about. No question, it's a struggle. And that said, I don't think it means that we have to live with it entirely, because I would say that guilt can absolutely destroy your mental health and really prevent you from enjoying the remaining time with your loved one. So I know it's not as easy as just let go of it, just don't feel guilty. If it were that easy, we wouldn't be having this conversation. But I will make some suggestions around how you can manage your caregiver guilt in particular. So one is to just do that, is acknowledge it. So any emotion is not right or wrong. It just is. Feelings are not right or wrong. They just are. So acknowledging that you feel guilty is a first step rather than typically we want, I shouldn't, we try and suppress or ignore, but it is affecting our mental health. So let's call it what it is, and be open to finding some support to resolve some of it or help manage it. So it is making you human. The reason you feel guilt is because you have empathy and you feel bad, and that is not a bad thing necessarily. It's just how much guilt do you have and how pervasive is it, so that it is inhibiting you from actually enjoying anything in life. And so that's why let's acknowledge it and say, okay, what are we going to do with it? And one of the first things I would say is we need to adjust our expectations. We need to realize that we have often very unrealistic expectations about what we should and shouldn't be doing, how much time we should be spending with our loved one, how much care we should be providing, the quality of care we should be providing. And that can put us in a 24/7 role, which, as you know very well, can completely burn you out. So I think we need to be realistic about our expectations and not expect to provide 24/7 care. No one can do that. All of us need a break and to recharge. So not to feel badly if you feel like you need that break or you acknowledge that you need that break. The person is going to get sicker or more ill, or the illness is going to progress, whether you're there 24/7 or not. That, like I said, what's in our control is how much and what we do, but the illness is completely out of our control. So you want to keep your loved one as healthy as possible, but that means keeping yourself healthy as well. Another thing, so acknowledging it and balancing your expectations or adjusting your expectations. Another suggestion I'm going to make is, and you're going to love this one, avoid comparisons. When you hear about another caregiver who did this or wasn't doing that or does so much of that, all of a sudden you're like, okay, I'm the worst caregiver in the world because I'm not doing that, or I don't have the patience to that, or I can't play a board game with them, or whatever it is, or I'm not going for a walk. It's that you do you.
Yeah.
They'll do what they'll do. You do what you do, and you don't really know what's going on in somebody else's home. So you may be just seeing a small snapshot of what the bigger picture is. So remember that you need to do what you for yourself, for your family, for your loved one, and what other people do. That's great, and you can get good ideas and suggestions. But you're not better or worse.
I love that. I love that, because you're right. Comparisons are, yeah, I love that.
Yeah, so that's a really important one. Also focus on the time, and we talked about this earlier, focus on the time that you do have. And so, because you feel about, I'm not doing enough, or I'm not, well, but what are you doing with the time that you do have? Sometimes we get very focused on the health piece of it, but if we can try and carve out some time to just enjoy little moments and remind yourself that you're doing enough, that is that would, I hope, be a little bit helpful. And then here it will come up again, the idea of seeking social support.
Mhm.
And that means finding those, I call them feel-good people, that you can be any way you want to be, happy, sad, guilty, angry, frustrated, and they will support you and they will support the situation. So finding those people that will come over and recognize that perhaps your loved one is absolutely not who they were, but that's okay. They'll still spend time with them and even give you some breaks, some much needed breaks. I remember being a facilitator for a caregiver support group for people who had partners with Parkinson's, and they felt so bad about leaving their loved one to come to a support group.
Mhm.
And
Mhm.
like, I mean,
Mhm.
this was like
100%.
it was recharging them so
Mhm.
that they can
Mhm.
go back and feel
Mhm.
a little bit more like they could breathe a little, they can do a little, because when you just drop everything else that you do, and that would be coming up to my next suggestion, we talked about how dangerous the isolation is. So looking for support and finding creative ways of supporting. Hopefully there's some family members or some good friends. Sometimes a CLSC or agencies can help, but you need it. You need that social support. You can't be there 24/7. And that speaks to finding some balance, because again, we feel like we should be there all the time, but being a caregiver, and I hope you can agree with me on this, shouldn't be your entire identity.
Mhm.
I know it's not easy to you're not picking up and going out
Mhm.
entirely, but I remember speaking with someone who loved ballroom dancing.
Mhm.
And even as a couple, they used to compete, and there was no way he could compete, but she continued on. And then she felt guilty. And
Yeah.
we talked about how she would feel so much better if she were doing a little bit of that, and then because then she wouldn't feel like she's lost everything in her life.
Mhm.
So
Mhm.
it's carving out a little bit of time for you to maintain your own mental health and feel good things that can be different and outside of your caregiver role.
So let's just talk very briefly about one other emotion that some people are hiding, the emotion of anger, right? And so, we know that with grief brings sadness and brings guilt, but the topic of anger is often, I hear that a lot from the care partners that I work with, right? That this whole illness has become a burden and I feel like I'm a prisoner and I can't take this anymore. But people are, I guess, ashamed to admit that they feel anger. So is that something that is, would you see that a lot in your practice as well?
I think that I'm going to be a bit stereotypical here, but especially as women, anger is not a pretty emotion,
Mm-hmm.
or that so acceptable for women, but it's not exclusive to gender. It's a normal reaction to the change. And anger, often for me, when you tease out the anger, and that with you would go, whether it's excessive guilt or excessive anger or excessive anything, if you do seek out the support of a therapist to unpack that, because often anger covers sadness.
Mm-hmm.
And it's easier to be angry than
Mm-hmm.
it is to be sad. People feel guilt, and I'm not even sure that it's guilt. I think that we are, whether it's guilt, whether it's anger that you're expressing, I think we're really feeling very helpless.
Mm-hmm.
And who wants to say, I feel helpless? When you say, I feel guilty, when I feel angry, maybe there's something else you can do about it. It's more of a typical reaction, but yet an uncomfortable one. But feeling helpless, oh my gosh, that implies you have no control. But guess what? You have no control. So feeling anger is normal. It's what you do with the anger. How does it manifest?
Mm-hmm.
How are you taking out that anger? And let's find healthy or more healthy ways of managing any of those emotions, so that you don't find yourself in a situation where you're doing something that you probably shouldn't be doing.
So this is one of my last questions, which is a tough one. So what advice would you have for people who are caring for a person with a terminal illness that, death is inevitable, right? The end is coming. So how could people prepare themselves? I mean, I know it's basic. I mean, I accompanied both my parents to the end, and as much as you could think you're prepared, you're not prepared. But what could we do to help facilitate that
Well,
inevitable journey?
starting to recognize that the anticipatory grief, it serves a function of you are grieving, preparing for that loss. And that, by the way, does not mean when someone dies that you're not going to feel grief. No, it's going to change. Expect that those feelings are going to get more intensive as it comes closer to the death. And then it's not that they become less intense after, they just become different. So typically anticipatory grief and these feelings will become, let's be honest, it's going to be harder, and then it's going to be different, and hopefully alleviate the grief will always be thereafter, but it won't be as intense as it was leading up to the death. Acknowledge what is happening and take control of the things you can take control of and what you can do. So let's use the remaining time as productively, as meaningfully as possible. Get those stories from the person, take the pictures that you can, say the unfinished things or the unspoken things that you never had, as a grief counselor, but even as someone who worked in a funeral home for 5 years, meeting with families. They had no idea what the person's wishes were around. And I know we don't want to talk about that, but it's not fun to guess. So if we could take advantage of the time you have, reflect on that time, remember to take care of yourself as well, but pull in the support systems, say yes to any kind of support that you can in terms of groups or counseling that you might need, because that's the time to get it. And don't assume other people are going to understand it. So you may have to, I wish you didn't have to, but you may have to educate other people or explain to other people, but never apologize for your feelings. Just help people understand. And again, don't forget to ask for help.
Ask for help. I can't emphasize that enough, right? Ask for help even after the person passes away. Make sure to receive that post death support, and post grief, because you've spent so long coping with a certain way of managing your grief, and just because a person passes away doesn't mean that those emotions are going to go away. So it's really important to get that post caregiver support, right? That's
yeah.
so much needed.
If the number of people have to say to me, I think I'm going crazy. No, you're grieving. Grief looks, by the way, grief looks a lot like depression, but it's not. The difference between grief and depression is depression, you don't have a reason. You just feel a certain way. It's very chemical or genetic within you, whereas in grief, you have a reason. So understand that this is difficult and painful and messy. And it's also part of life. And it's only difficult and painful and messy because you had someone in your life, or you have someone in your life that you love so much. Grief and love, package deal.
Corrie, thank you so much for taking the time to be with us today. Every time you come on, it's just wonderful to go back and forth and hear your advice. So thank you so much for being with us today.
My pleasure. Thanks so much for having me. Take care.
This webcast is an initiative of the McGill University Dementia Education Program, which is funded by private donations. If you would like to make a contribution to our program, or for more information about all of our wonderful resources, please go to mcgill.ca/dementia. And if you would like to join our mailing list to be notified about upcoming episodes of McGill Cares, as well as other important programs and resources from us, please email us at dementia@mcgill.ca. Thank you for watching.